My one and only experience on a pogo stick was taking one bounce on it, letting go of the handlebars and just clarting myself in the face. And that was kind of where my pogo career came to an end. But all across the world, a handful of bouncy boys have taken what many consider a child's toy and turned it into something truly nuts. Xpogo, or extreme pogo, is the sport of doing tricks, flips, and big jumps on a souped up pogo stick. With crazy world records, viral videos, and annual competitions, in today's video we will explore how the hell this all happened. Now, it might come as a little bit of a surprise that the exact origins of the pogo stick aren't really that well documented. The scholars of the time were too busy bouncing around to, take any note. And honestly, the history is a little bit of a mess. Wikipedia states that the original pogo stick came out in 1891 by George Harrington with his invention, the spring stilt. But then some people completely refute that, and they say that two Germans came up with it, Max Pollig and Ernest Gottschall. The first two letters of each name, being Po and Go, were taken and then later used to name the pogo. But at the time that they patented it in 1920, they called it the spring end hopping stilt. Not quite as catchy as pogo. But then a man by the name of George B. Hansberg laid his sort of claim to the invention when he patented his two-handed pogo design. But then the weird thing is that George completely fabricated a story as to the origin of the pogo. So George claims that the inspiration came from this Burmese girl who didn't have any shoes to wear, and so her dad invented this mechanically complex, spring-loaded bouncing stick. And apparently he did all of that instead of just trying to get a hold of some shoes.
And the daughter's name happened to be Pogo.
And there you have it.
There you have it.
But anyway, ridiculous origin story aside, the pogo stick would see its first rise in popularity around the 20s. It was originally used in this musical called the Ziegfeld Follies, and then suddenly loads of dancers and choreographers would use the pogo stick in their performances. It was a bit of a gimmick that they all kind of did. And as you can probably imagine, this became a hit amongst the kids. Particularly in the 50s, it was very common that kids would play on pogo sticks. It was like the trendy cool thing to have. I can just imagine these gangs of kids bouncing around like kangaroos down the street. So as time passed, more and more companies would come along and more different types of pogo sticks would get popular. And as you can imagine, over time, people would start to get good at it. You'd have people one-upping each other to see who was the bounciest of all the boys. And so we would start to see some world records. One of the OG world records was by a guy called Gary Stewart, aka Mr. Pogo Stick. And in the year 1990, your boy Gazza did 177,737 consecutive jumps on a pogo stick. This boy was bouncing for 20 hours straight. And so pogo remained a relatively successful kids toy. The sort of thing you'd do in a PE class, or maybe one of the rich kids might have one at home, and it would remain like that for the vast majority of the 1900s. But that was all about to change in 1999 with a man from Utah named David Armstrong. So as you guys will be familiar from my other videos, between the 90s to the early 2000s, the wave of extreme sports was massive, with BMX, skateboarding and rollerblading being at the forefront. But one day, David decided he would try and see if a pogo stick could work in that kind of extreme sport environment. And so our boy Dave would spend endless hours grafting out new tricks, jumping them on walls, off of walls, with quite a lot of influence from BMX style tricks. But then one day in the early 2000s, David decided to go on this bustling, cool new thing called the internet and create a janky ass website called Xpogo.com. X being short for extreme pogo. This website sought to create a community for Xpogo and kind of help promote the sport. Get it out there through videos, tutorials, trick guides and a forum where people could talk. And it very quickly became the central hub for this new sport of extreme pogo. So at this point in the early 2000s, the sport was very small. You got to bear in mind this was pre-social media. In order to find this website, you'd have had to search out for it. But for those very select people that did decide to search for extreme pogo on Google for whatever reason, they would be able to see David doing some incredible stuff with a pogo stick. But let's just hold up for 1 second. You see, David's claim to be the pioneer of extreme pogo has kind of been disputed over the years, because the title for the OG Bouncy Boy is a very prestigious one, so it's important that we tell the full story. So at the same time around the 2000s, independently from David, there were a number of other people doing the same thing with a pogo stick. You'd have people like Nick McClintock, Nick Ryan, Fred Grzybowski, Dan Brown, Rick George, and Matt Malcolm. All of them have thrown their name in as the pioneer. It's kind of like the pogo equivalent of laying your claim for the Iron Throne, but the general consensus that has emerged is that David Armstrong is probably the founder of Xpogo. However, as time passed, they put their differences aside and would come together to connect through the very early Xpogo forums. And so in this very early era in the 2000s, we'd see the first pogo teams start to pop up. Obviously, you'd have Team Xpogo, but outside of that, you'd have Team Hyper Pogo, Pogo Cult, Grand Theft Pogo, which I think is the best name, Say No to Park, and the Pogo Squad. And so at this time, they were just on these forums sharing the stuff that they found cool. New tricks would pop up with new names. You'd have the Malcolm X, the Candy Bar, 1 foot peg grab, but little did they know, amongst all of this, they were inadvertently laying the groundwork for this brand new sport of Xpogo. And if you watch these videos, it was very impressive to see what they were doing, considering the time period, a lack of knowledge of what was possible, and most importantly, the lack of proper equipment. You see, the lack of proper equipment for what they were doing was starting to cause a bit of a roadblock. You know, because there's only so much you can do off of a pogo stick that you stole off your little sister when she got bored of her Christmas present. As time would pass, the race would begin for the evolution of the pogo stick. The Pogo 2.0, so to speak. And this would cause a technological race akin to the US-Soviet space race, which would eventually lead to 2004 with the invention of the Flybar 1200, the world's first extreme pogo stick. This baby was like the holy grail of pogo sticks. It was like the creators of it went into custom mode and turned all the levels up to 100. This thing was mental. Before we go any further, a massive shout out to Vite Ramen for sponsoring today's video. Vite Ramen is the perfect way to have a super tasty meal that's quick and easy to make, that is actually healthy. I can't lie, I'm a bit of a convenience eater. I don't like spending a ton of time preparing food. But your boy wants to be healthy. I've got to look after this. Vite Ramen is a massive part of my diet because it's such an easy way when I'm working or I'm too busy to cook. I just put this on, takes 3 minutes. Just like that, I'm having 28 grams of complete protein. As well, I'm getting 27 micronutrients. They very recently put out their version 3.0. This baby's better than ever, so definitely go check out the links in the description and use the code JimmyTheGiantUK to get 10% off. Anyway, back to the video. But you see, the race for the Pogo 2.0 didn't come easy. Multiple companies were trying to make this thing, they invested hundreds of thousands into it, and it even resulted with putting someone in hospital because the Pogo exploded and they had to go and get surgery. But you see, this was a small price to pay, a necessary sacrifice to make a Pogo stick that could jump higher than anyone had ever seen before. With the Flybar 1200, the floodgates were open. And very shortly after its release, a new race had begun, leading to an all-out battle between two iconic pogo stick riders, Pogo Fred and Chewy, as they battled it out to be the first person on Earth to land a backflip on a pogo stick. This battle would consume Fred and Chewy for the best part of a year, but one day in 2005, Fred would receive a phone call from Chewy, claiming that he had landed the world's first backflip. As you can imagine, this killed Fred. He wanted to be the world's first to do it, so he demanded proof. He wanted to see it, and so Chewy sends him a reel of photos. Chewy never actually filmed the world's first backflip. He just took a photo series for some reason. But anyway, that aside, the backflip had been landed, and quickly after, Fred landed it as well. After the first backflip was landed, the whole game changed. Suddenly, flips and big air tricks were now possible on a pogo stick. And so from here, the tricks would get crazier and crazier. New and improved pogo sticks would be launched that could jump higher than the ones previous, with the iconic Vertigo being released in 2006 and the Pogo being released in 2008. This technological revolution was akin to the freaking Enlightenment period for the world of Xpogo. And so not only would the tricks get bigger and crazier, but the Xpogo scene itself would start to grow. In 2004, we would have the world's first Pogopalooza, which was held by the Xpogo guys in a car park in Nebraska. They competed for a bag of trail mix. But this small meetup of friends and family would go on to grow and grow. The globally recognized World Cup of Pogo Stick. Pogopalooza is incredibly important to the world of Pogo. The competition was nuts and it would make iconic memories, but it wasn't just about the competitiveness. Pogopalooza became this place for this very small community of Xpogo to connect with like-minded people over the thing that they loved. And as soon as one was over, it was like Christmas. You'd sit there waiting anxiously until the next year's Pogopalooza. And so from the mid to late 2000s, Pogo would continue to grow. But then everything would change in 2009. Pogopalooza 6 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Over 50 athletes from all across America, Canada, England had assembled for this event that now spanned across 4 days, filled with different events and competitions. By now, athletes had reached new levels on the pogo stick. Doing flips had basically become the norm. Stair sets were being cleared, people were doing back falls. The skill level had gotten mad, and eventually the mainstream world would start to notice it. After Pogopalooza 6 had happened, the media had started to take an interest in the world of Xpogo. The Wall Street Journal had run a full front page article all about Xpogo. The BBC ran a segment and many others. The sport was gaining mass notoriety. And this was all about the same time that YouTube was starting to pop off. And as you can imagine, videos of Xpogo started to blow up. More and more people would join the sport, and the world of Xpogo was kind of riding a bit of a high. By now, the website of Xpogo.com had made a YouTube channel where they would put out videos of their tours around the world. And they were starting to get views, hundreds of thousands of views. On top of that, other channels were making content on Xpogo, such as Dude Perfect's video in 2015.
We're Dude Perfect! Welcome to Xpogo Edition!
Which has gained an insane 57 million views. Pogopalooza 10 would go ahead in New York City in 2013. This event was so successful that Xpogo decided to make bit of a risky decision, and that was to make the next Xpogo a multi-city international event. And Xpogo were trying to see just how far this thing could go. And so the event went ahead across 3 different cities: Montpellier, France, Pittsburgh, USA, and Helsingborg, Sweden. But the risk paid off. From here, more and more viral videos would happen. You'd see videos with Devon Supertramp. There'd be a ton of Guinness World Record attempts, TV appearances. Pogo stick riders were now able to live off the sport through doing performances at halftime shows at sporting events and stuff like that. The whole thing was looking pretty good, but then they flew a little too close to the sun. You see, the company Xpogo, who organised Pogopalooza, they'd started to run into some financial difficulties. With all this investment into trying to make Pogopalooza a multi-city event, running a number of different events internationally, the actual industry wasn't quite there to sustain it. So in a panic to survive, they had to start scaling down their business. And whilst they were throwing buckets out of the sinking ship that was Xpogo, some internal conflicts started to arise. You see, with budgets being slashed, certain people's work was becoming less and less of a priority for the company. Things would start heating up between the athletes and some of the organisers in Xpogo. And all of this would come to a head in 2017. After what looked on the surface to be a pretty successful year, filled with a number of events, exhibitions all around the country, Xpogo would make a shock announcement. And they would announce that there would be no Pogopalooza 2017. As you can imagine, this was a major blow for the community of Xpogo. This wasn't just a competition for them, this was like a family reunion, and it was being cut for the first time ever in 13 years. This further started to worsen the kind of resentment that was growing in the community. And some of the top Pogo riders would feel anger towards Xpogo. You know, because from their perspective, they would see Xpogo doing all these fairs, exhibitions, performances all throughout the year. But for some reason, they weren't able to do Pogopalooza. Some would feel that the direction that Xpogo was going in was becoming too polished and kind of corporate. And to the die-hard Xpogo riders, it didn't really represent what the sport was really about. As time had passed, disputes would grow, and a kind of rebel faction was starting to form, leading to the creation of one team in particular. Mile High Pogo Supply. Mile High were like a reaction to the direction that Xpogo were taking the sport during the 2010s. Instead of going for like glossy and polished, they were trying to make their videos look more like skateboarding videos, focusing on lifestyle, filming it from a fisheye. You get the kind of idea. What they were trying to do was move the image away from like this performance and viral video approach and show what was to them the real image of Xpogo. From here, the company Xpogo would have to go back to the drawing boards. They decided to shake up some of the staff.
So I took over in 2018, I think partially because culturally things kind of needed to shift. And remember, like, why are we here?
From here, the company Xpogo would have to go back to the drawing boards and had learnt a harsh lesson from over-investing in a sport before the industry was really there to sustain it. And so they decided to up and move their headquarters to Pittsburgh, where now to this day is the home place for Pogopalooza.
There is no other place. This is it.
Instead of like chasing around the world trying to attract the general public and this non-Pogo audience, they made an important decision to try and refocus the event to be for the community. And sure, if an outsider wanted to come along and see it, great, but that stopped being the main focus. I do honestly respect this approach. It reminds me a lot of how skateboarding became cool. It moved from these super corporate events into these backyard parties. From here, it was able to create an authentic culture. And to me, this is kind of similar to what Xpogo are doing now. And because of this decision, the sport is doing really well. In the past few years, the Xpogo guys on Instagram and TikTok have started to build up a following, and as well, the individual athletes are really building a name for themselves. Of those athletes, you have people like Xpogo Tone, Dangerous, Dalton Smith, who's otherwise known as Man with Pogo. This guy's arguably the best. He's won Pogopalooza like 7 times in a row. He has 70k plus followers on Instagram, and very recently Steve-O shared one of his clips, which is nuts. Oh, by the way, if you want me to make a Steve-O video, comment below. You've also got some of the like newer young guns with Pogo Tyler and Xpogo Henry. These two guys are planning to move to California and kind of pursue this almost like Pogo influencer lifestyle. And you know what, man? Fucking good luck to them. I really love seeing when people are just so passionate about something and they just want to push it and see how far it can go. Oh, and another insane athlete you have to check out is Pogo Kellogg. This guy is like one of the real up and comers, and he's like outdoing some of the OG guys. On top of athletes, the scene has also had some very iconic moments. Moments such as when they jumped down the Hollywood High 16 stair gap, which is like a famous gap in the world of skateboarding. And these boys did it on a pogo stick. You also have the very recent moment from Dalton Smith where he landed the double stick flip at Pogopalooza. This is like considered the hardest trick in the history of Pogo. And on top of all that, very recently, ESPN and their show, The Ocho, they've done this whole feature on the world of Xpogo.
Pressure is on, he is at his best.
Dalton really moves like a fine-tuned machine.
The channel Braille, that I'm sure you guys watch a lot of, they've also done videos with Xpogo and they've had millions of views.
What happens if you land like this?
I've also broken that part too.
Your leg?
My urethra.
Wait, what?
There's been a ton of world records, but there is one thing that is yet to happen, and that is the double backflip. It's not happened yet. Will, who I spoke to, reckons it'll probably happen next year. But when this happens, this is going to be a massive milestone for the world of Xpogo. But you know, all in all, man, it's been so incredible diving into this subculture. Seeing how this sport kind of evolved from a few lads just fucking around the car park into this major annual event and viral videos and pros living off the sport. Honestly, I'm blown away by not just the skill of these Xpogo guys, just their commitment and their passion to build this thing up. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Oh, and I know it's short-lived, but I'm probably not going to do the Jimmy score. I just feel it is a little bit cheeky putting a rating on someone's life. I'm streaming Riders Republic live here on YouTube, 6 PM every Monday UK time. So be sure to come and join us. You can support me by picking something up at jimmythegiant.co.uk, donating to me on Patreon, or using the sponsored link below. Peace.